So it's a big question. I think religion impacts everybody, particularly in the United States, whether you're particularly religious or not, because we basically are like half a step away from like a Christian autocracy. And so there are plenty of things that are instituted because of Christians having an outsized control of the purse strings and the control of how my mom wanted us to go to church. We went to my grandmother's church a couple of times. I did not like it because one of us on Saturday morning, and that was when all the good cartoons were on. She was Seventh-day Adventist, and I did not want to be involved. It was like, no, and it's hot. I don't like these dress shoes. And it seems, and I remember always saying, it doesn't seem like Nana actually likes these people because she talks about them all the time. Why does she keep going? And if she doesn't want to go, why do I want to go? Well, I am like 6 or 7, 8 saying these things. So you could tell they were happy with me. And so I was just like, yeah, why would I want to do that? My grandmother gave me a Bible, and I still have it just because she gave it to me. It says, this is the only book that can save you if you do what God says. She gave that to me in 92, 93. So I was like about 10 years old. And that's, yeah, so it had that. I grew up around church. And for me, because of everything that was happening in my childhood, the people who were around me and who were like authority figures in my life were like, well, you're special and you're called. And that's why your life is hard. And so, because, when people are called, they have to go through hard stuff, but just keep holding on and eventually things are going to be better. And I kind of took that and absorbed that. And so in my mind, well, I'm supposed to be a Christian. And that's just, it's inevitable that it's going to happen. I wouldn't go as far to say as that I was forced to be a Christian, because again, nobody made me go to church or anything like that. My dad actually, from what I understand, really put his foot down there because he was like, no, if you make him go now, he's not going to ever want to go. And he knew what it was like to be forced to go. And he didn't like going. So it's like, no, he doesn't want to go. He doesn't need to go. Like, what is he getting from there if he goes? He doesn't need to go. So don't make him, type of thing. And, I carried that all through college. I know I got saved officially in college and joined a particularly charismatic Pentecostal non-denominational churches. That was those things were the rage in the early 2000s. Progressed through. But I think as I've learned more and grown more and came to more awareness, those moments change in what they mean to you. And that particular moment is what actually led me to stop trying to keep my faith alive. Because I was actually struggling for at least a couple of years with, do I still believe this? And this is like years after seminary. So their experience is they go to seminary, they learn a bunch of stuff about what the Bible actually says, they learn a bunch of history, they learn what it says and what it doesn't say, and how it actually doesn't even really say what they were trying to say. when you get into the translations, stuff like that, and they just lose it. And usually they become an atheist because they're leaving a very strict, conservative, authoritarian type of religion. That was not my case. I actually just developed into a more progressive type of Christianity, and as the years went on, and by the time I was struggling with my belief, and my belief is in the supernatural overall, I was a very radical Christian. Some people would even argue if I was Christian at all, because I was like, oh, I don't really care if Jesus is God or not. Who cares? That one of those type of like on the edge. So it wasn't like I was some conservative Christian who was like, oh, I hate this and then I was like, no, there was a lot of steps in between there. I was a Christian for a while, but I was trying to find a way to hold on to my belief. Like I knew about all different types of atonement theories and theologies and liberation theology and Black theology and queer theology and all of these books and things. Maybe I can cobble something together this day. But when it clicked to me that, I was given Christianity as a way to cope with trauma. And that was likely what they used to deal with their own trauma. And that while I was not forced to go to church, I never really had a chance to figure out what else could be beyond that, because it wasn't made available and it just wasn't given to me as what my eventual end would be. And once I realized that, it was like, okay, boom, we're done. We're done.
You can let a murderer in the church. You can let a pedophile in the church. You can let a adulterer in the church. You can do all that and be back into the church, say forgiveness, whatever it is, but you better not be gay. How much money you've given to the church, how many Hail Marys you've said, how many children you saved out of burning building. If you're gay, you automatically are just disqualified from entering the gates of heaven. And we hear this through a person's. The whole Bible is a book and story, right? At the end of the day, it depends how you connect to the story in the book.
All interpretation.
But there's no other book in the world that has created so much hatred, war, and inhumanity towards man than the Bible. There's not another book in the planet that people have been using to justify hatred. Yeah, more hatred because of a book, because of someone's recollection of what happened before any of us was around. This is what we have, and we're still dealing with it. So I believe in religion, but the Bible is another story, because we are told that these are the stories of old, just like the way that the Declaration of Independence is a story of old. But yet we will tell you right off the bat that should change because it is not the same now as it was then. But you will never hear somebody say, "Oh, we should rewrite the Bible because that was then and this is now." They'll never say it. But we're living in a totally different place in time in the world. So why would you allow those things to still dictate the way you live today? I will eat pork, and pork is delicious, and I love some pork chops. What are we talking about? We can't eat pork. So, that's, it's one of those things. I love bacon, but you tell me you can't eat bacon, but I can't.
Okay, so I remember being like 16 or 17, and I was in one of my worst depressions, and I was trying to pray. I was praying to God to have me to have this take the gay away. I don't want to be gay anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. Just please, if it is a sin, so just take it away. And I remember hearing in my heart, why would I take away what I made you? It was loud, it was clear, and that's what started me to look at Christianity really hard. Like, why would God tell me that? You know what I mean? Like, and I why would he say this to me? Like, why would I take away what I made you? So like, that's what made me, this can't be a sin. Why would he would not make me a sin? You know what I mean? So I started looking at religion very hard. And then I got into college where we were talking about Carl Jung and how he did a study on all the religions, and they all have the same things: 3 days, the 12 disciples, and the one source. I know that religion has a part in people's lives that could be healthy, because I even catch myself when I watch shows and they look at people's religion as if it's this horrible thing, and it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. It's always just from the person who is delivering the message. It's the person who makes it bad. You know what I mean? Not to say I'm not a religious person. I would say that I'm a very spiritual person, because I believe that my beliefs are just all over the place. But like, I feel like it's narrowed down that I do, right, that I do believe that the universe has put us here for a purpose. You know what I'm saying? And I don't know how to put this, but it's like all of the religions are talking about the same thing. There is no difference. It's just how you decide to follow it, which is why I never like shame anybody how they're doing it, because it's just how your life is destined to follow your spiritual path. It's different for everyone. We can take from each other. That's what the whole language barriers were for, to learn from each other. I'm definitely not a religious person. I'm very weary of people who are religious. You know what I mean? My guard is always automatically up, not even just for sin. It's just like some people, especially for the Black community, Christianity was made to enslave us. They mess up translations all the time on purpose to enslave everyone to disdain women, to disdain homosexuals, where it was nothing to do with homosexuality, but for pedophilia. And everyone, and I keep running across people who would accept the pedophile in the family, but not the gay person in the family. So I don't understand how your religion is okay with that. You know what I'm saying? So like, it definitely puts me at a 10-foot pole away from people who are religious, because I just don't know where you're coming from or how you are going to look at anything that I do in my lifestyle, because I know I'm not judging yours. So I don't know why you could come into my space and judge me, which is also a sin, but okay. I have rarely found love in religion. I have, I had, well, no, well, when I was with the Church of the Nazarene and I went to church camp or whatever, that was probably one of the few, and they were predominantly a white crowd, but I also never came out to them either. You know what I mean? Because I knew I was going to get, they already started making fun of me because I was, because I was feminine. So I knew, oh, that's not going to happen, not here. Maybe I just won't be gay here. Because I feel like people subtract the spiritual side of religion. Like there's like this whole spiritual realm of religion that you're I shouldn't say supposed to have, but that you could have, and no one sees it. And I've never been so in touch with my spiritual side until I came out of the closet, until I came in touch with being a homosexual person. And that's when I really got in touch with my spiritual side.
I know how you and I encountered one another is, I'm sure you saw some of my TikToks. I went to Howard University School of Divinity, graduated with a Master's of Divinity, and then I went to Wesley Theological Seminary and got a Master's in Theological Study. And I researched and discussed evangelical culture and politics. After that, did a lot of advocacy work, a lot of progressive religious organizing work, and all of that. And I'm still doing advocacy communications as a career today.
My mom is a very progressive woman, very progressive mom and parent and everything like that. But at the time dealing with me, she was a single mother. And also she was basically going off of what she knew. Which was basically more or less to pray about it. Ending 11th grade, going into senior year that summer is kind of when we started like having the whole "are you gay" type thing. And of course, I was like, I'm bi, to kind of soften the blow, which I was using to soften the blow, but it is true. But because I'm not quote unquote, well, not true, I'll say I'm more fluid. But it wouldn't have been understood. And it still would have also left me with, you need to choose this or that. So more or less,
it would have put you in a box one way or the other.
Yeah. So either way, I was just like,
their understanding.
So I would go in the bathroom for whatever reason. That was like a good place to pray, even though I had my own room at the time. I would go in the bathroom and like I could remember, like I could see the tile right now. I could see it, and I could see myself on my knees on the bath mat, praying / wishing / like begging for you to take this away from me, because it's going to destroy me, it's going to destroy my family. And then I can also remember me being a smart person and realizing that nothing happened.
Nothing happened.
With that nothing happened, and I was just like, well, I started developing this theory. I was like, somebody's lying. I was like, and I even make a joke about like, oh, the person who wrote that in the Bible probably was gay and was scorned by a lover, and that's why, or not wrote that, but like this is where the whole issue came from, basically a scorned gay person, because that's something petty we would do. And I end up finding this book. I went to Outright in Atlanta. It was this bookstore I had kind of found, and I actually don't know where the book is to this day. It might be in the garage. Daniel Hemniak is What the Bible Really Says About Homosexuality. And I didn't ever finish it for whatever reason. I think because I thought I got the gist of it, but I didn't really finish it. But I can remember it was just translation. Like at that point, because he was like, think of somebody saying, no, a man can't enter the kingdom of heaven no more than he can pass through the eye of a needle. So then it cut to, in the book, the eye of the needle place in that land where it's a place that was hard and treacherous to get through because it was very narrow for the camels or whatever type of, for you all to travel through. So we're like, it's literally just asking is, could you explain a little bit of the theology behind it, or try to say, is it a sin or is it not a sin? I know it's not necessarily greater or less than any other sin if it is, but just can you just kind of speak on that aspect?
Sure, but first, yes about that, but that scripture about the eye of the needle, if I understand correctly, that actually was not a place. It's an allegory. And what I mean, like, think about it, it's absurd. And so what parables, the point of parables is to use a very common thing that somebody would know and pair it with something completely absurd. But it's just such an absurdity. It's like, can a camel fit through the eye of a needle? Of course it can't. Saying it is basically, what he's saying is that it's basically functionally impossible for rich people to get into heaven, which people struggle with. They try to make that more allegory because we all want to be rich, but it's like, no, Jesus was serious when he said that. It was like, you need to become like us, and we're all poor. So he did, the rich young ruler did everything he was supposed to do except give away his money. And people were like, oh yeah, that was more about spirit. Like, no. He wanted him to not be rich. Jesus did not like rich people. If folks are mad at Elizabeth Warren and stuff now, they absolutely should hate Jesus. The first will be last, the top will be the bottom. He's talking about the reversal of society, that people who are on the top are going to not just fall down, get knocked down, and the people on the bottom will get elevated. And so it was more about demonstrating, he basically saying that if you're rich, you're not going to, like, God doesn't want anything to do with you because you're rich, because of how you exploit people, and God does not deal with that. So the only way you could get into God's good graces is if you stop being rich. So about homosexuality, it's a couple of things that are working at the same time here. We'll start one by one. First, the word homosexuality did not even come into being as a concept till the 19th century. So we're talking like the 1800s, right? And so the very concept of someone being more or less attracted to the same, they would say the same sex, we would say the same gender nowadays, is something that's when that idea came to be. And I believe it was a German researcher who kind of came up with that. And he came to the conclusion that there's nothing inherently wrong about that. So the person who kind of came up with this idea ultimately did not see anything wrong with it at all. So the question becomes, if a concept that didn't fully exist until the 1800s, if it didn't exist until then, what are they talking about in scripture? Because, if nobody had this, clearly they were aware that men had sex with men and women had sex with women. Everybody was aware of that. That wasn't like a strange thing, and different cultures had varying perspectives on it. But this idea of, oh, you love this, you're a dude and you love this dude, you want to be with this dude the way you are with like a wife, so to speak, and that's a normal, typical a range of human experience, that didn't exist anywhere in the Bible, didn't exist anywhere. Like, no one had that as a concept. So they already established that homosexuality as a concept did not exist in ancient times. Men were having sex with men, women were having sex with women, they knew that, but the concept of, oh, this is a typical and normal and within the range of human experience and capacity, that didn't exist, wasn't there. So now you have to get into the cultural context, and sometimes you have to go by sections. In the Hebrew Bible, which most people will call the Old Testament, I don't call it that because it's not old. Jewish people still use it. And it's kind of disrespectful. Like, what if somebody called your stuff old and their stuff new? You know what I mean? So people don't tend to use that. The idea, you have to go back to how they understood reproduction to work. If you are a people who live in the desert, who have to rely on seasonal rains to get crops, who are under constant warfare, right? They are going to prize men, because men, at least the way they think of it, men fight. And to them, you can only pass down property through who? Men. Again, not because it's how it works or because whatever. Now, they had no concept of egg and sperm. And what they thought, like when the Bible, like when they say like their seed, they literally thought it was a seed. They thought, I know people say it now and being funny, like, oh, you know, my kids or whatever, right? But they literally thought they were little children in their semen, and that the woman just held it like a flower pot. And then in 9 months, it pops out. So they didn't think the women had anything to do with any of it at all. And that if you are wasting semen, you're literally wasting children. Also, keep in mind, most children that are born die. They die, right? Not up until our grandparents' age that people actually start living past 5 in droves. People didn't live super long. People commonly died in childbirth. And so you need to take advantage of every chance you can to get kids, either men to raise up and carry on the line, or women to sell, off to marriage. So is it really about being gay, or is it about, look, we got to have these kids, really mean these men? This not really talking about homosexuality. It's the idea of a group of people who have no concept of science as we do now, who are doing everything they can in their understanding to preserve themselves and their communities. I think it's also important to note, like David and Jonathan, King David, everybody loves King David. He is an absolute asshole. Because he's King David is a rapist. We have to call it like it is. When he saw Bathsheba bathing, and then called her to, his chambers or whatever, that was sexual assault, because Bathsheba she could not say no. There was no way she could say no to the king, right? But then also, if you read, just get a chance, go and read the things that David says about Jonathan. And it says that, John and David loved Jonathan, and his soul was knitted together, as if they were one soul. Yeah, it says that in there. And people talk about marriage being a soul tie. The only place where a soul tie is explicitly mentioned that way is between two men. Okay. And he said that, Jonathan, your love is greater than me, than the love of women. Who says that? It's in there. Trust me, go find it. It's in there. And then when Jonathan died, he mourned like he lost a lover. And so, there's clearly they had an intimate relationship that went far beyond what was typical, hell, of even men today. But it's heavily implied that even King Saul, Jonathan's dad, was like, okay, what's this funny business between both of you all happening? Like, Jonathan was the rightful prince, and he gave up his birthright for David. Somebody was sprung. My interpretation is that David slept his way to the top with men and women. But that's my spin on that, because ultimately David was only caring about his own self-interest, which is why he lied and did what he did with Bathsheba and all that type of stuff. He was only concerned about getting himself together, but he had these feelings for this other man. Moving into the New Testament, which is where people like to really stake their hat on, Jesus does not talk about it at all. Now, just because someone doesn't mention doesn't mean, like, I'm not one who thought or thinks that Jesus was like waving a rainbow flag at pride, because if Jesus, forget about whether or not he was God, Jesus was most likely an actual historical person, which means that he was bound by the confines and boundaries of his own time, right? So to think that a Jewish man 2,000 years ago from the sticks, from the hood of his time, would be like, oh, gay is okay. Sure. That's a reach for me. That is a reach for me. So I kind of diverge from people in that way. I don't mean that to say that you shouldn't say gay is okay. I just think that saying that Jesus doesn't mention it isn't exactly the best way to prove that it's fine, because Jesus didn't really care about sex at all. when given his talk about it, he's like, when the kingdom comes, we'll be like the angels, not given in marriage or anything like that. So in his mind, when the kingdom comes, ain't nobody gonna be doing nothing anyway. So who cares? So he really wasn't very, you can't really call him sex negative. He just didn't really care. He thought that once God came, ain't nobody gonna be doing that anyway, so who cares? But the things that people really latch onto are things just around these two words. One is arkonsentai in Greek, another one is malakoi. And so it's these two words that kind of don't really know what they mean. And I'm maybe confusing the means of two. One of them seems something like male bed or something to that extent, or you like something to do with like men and beds and like temple worship or something to that extent. But scholars don't really know. What they do know is that it's not, whatever situation they're mentioning, it's not a consensual relationship between two people. It's not a romantic relationship between two people. It is either, let's say, either it's some type of religious issue, because I had temple prostitutes, if you will. Actually, that in and of itself needs discussion, because sometimes Paul and other people in ancient times would call people prostitutes as an insult, even though they weren't. So that's another layer. But what those two words do not imply is that it's a committed, intentional relationship between two consenting adults. It's either some type of worship thing, or it's a situation where we're talking about minors being bought and abused, right? So it's either one of those, and not talking about what we think about today. The way that is phrased is that giving themselves up for themselves or whatever, however it's written, is he talking about before Jesus or after Jesus? Because it sounds like after. And in Galatians, he's like, there's neither slave nor free, Jew nor Greek, male or female in Christ. And that seems like simple, but it's like, those were the major divisions in society at the time. And what he's saying is that not like some type of colorblind type of thing where like we're all the same, we all bleed red. He wasn't really saying that. He's basically saying that the slave and the free, there's no difference between the two of them now. The free isn't better than the slave, and the slave is no longer a slave. A man is not better than a woman, and a woman is the same as a man. People say that Paul doesn't allow women preachers. He actually does. The letters that where Paul says, I do not permit a woman to teach, Paul actually did not write those. And most Christian scholars worth their salt will tell you that Paul did not. There's at least 5 or so letters. And most of those letters are in the shitty things that Paul says are in those letters. Not all, but most. Paul didn't even write those. So God tossed those away. That's a whole different topic. Sorry, I hope I'm not like blowing your mind away by this. And what I'm saying, a lot of this, I'm not like saying opinion, like you can find scholars who are saying all these things, so I'm not just pulling this out of my ass. In short, we have a book that is inconclusive at best, right? About whether or not it is, because even within the Bible, opinions and things change about certain topics. And one part of the Bible, it says that, the iniquity, your iniquity will be visited on your children and your children's children. In another part, it says the soul that sins must die. So then it's all of a sudden individual. Well, what is it? Which one is it? Something's changed. So what I would say is you have a book, you're trying to answer a question you're trying to use a book to provide an answer when it was never asking the question in the first place.
One, you're omnipotent and you know what you don't like and what you do like, I would say, more just to kind of make it simple. And yet you still allowed me to get through the birth process, grow up, and I still feel how I feel, but this is inherently wrong. And I'm like, well, why did you Why did you bring me to fruition? Why?
Yeah, why would you bring me into being and allow me to be a way that ultimately you would say is bad? Now, some would say that's because of original sin, that type of idea, like, that because Adam and Eve sinned, and really it was Adam because Eve wasn't anywhere around for the instructions. So, but it's from that apparently and guess what? Here's the thing. And that isn't really what I talked about. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. That's talking about all of us none of us meet God's standard. Not that there's something inwardly, like what original sin idea means, that there is something it's like a defect in all of us that is the result of Adam's sin. That no matter what we do, we need someone to fix us so that way God will accept us. Doesn't that sound wonderful? And so, but the thing is, this is why it's important to know where these documents come from. Jewish folk don't have that idea because the serpent in Genesis is not the devil. Jews don't have a devil. There is no devil in the entire Hebrew Bible. It's not in there. You see the word Satan, but Satan is more like the accuser. It's not the devil like we think, that basically is like God's mortal enemy. Satan actually worked for God and did God's bidding. And basically, if you read like Job, he's the one that went around looking for people to bring charges against and would say, hey, God, look at what they did. Or God, they're saying this, prove that. He actually worked for God. He wasn't a praise and worship leader. He wasn't Lucifer, a star of the morning. I was talking about a person. Like the idea of Satan, a devil that had power enough to oppose God for however much time, that just doesn't exist. There was no devil. Like the devil was not the serpent in the garden. It just happened to be a snake that said it. And so when you understand, it's like this idea of original sin isn't there. And even in the Hebrew Bible, God is not omniscient in there. It demonstrates that God is like, well, I'm going to do something, but let me ask my friend Abraham. Let me clear this with him first. Or with Moses, which I think one of my favorite relationships in the Bible between Moses and God. And God will make a promise, and they'd be like, you know what? Forget it. I'm gonna kill everybody. And Moses is like, wait a minute. You said that you weren't going to do that. You can't do that. You said that you were going to help us. So you need to help us like you said you would. And he's like, you know what? You're right. And then he's like, you know what? You people get on my nerves. I'm not going with you anymore. And it's like, wait a minute. You said that you were going to come with us. You brought us out here out of Egypt, and now you're going to leave us? We're only out here because you made us come out here. So when are you going to come? So, okay, fine. I don't really want to deal with y'all right now, but I'll send my angel. You know what I mean? And it's like the idea of God, literally says like God will repent, God will change his mind type of thing. And so God isn't omniscient. It's not until, I think this is inherently one of my biggest issues with Christianity. Divinity and supernatural ideas make much more sense when you don't ascribe goodness and all-knowingness together. Because once you say that your God is all love and all powerful, you have a lot of questions to answer, because it becomes hard to explain then. There is no good answer for why all the bad things happen in the world, particularly if you're saying that one God loves everybody. And even if God only loves, their children, if you will, why does God allow these evil things to happen? The reason I'm touching on all those other things is because I think that idea is very, very much rooted, like the idea of homosexuality being a sin is rooted in some of the same problematic theology that permeates so many other things. And part of my issue has been with the quote unquote gay churches is that they would often stop with, they would stop at gay as okay, but then literally keep everything else. Like I've heard, gay pastors, talking about, not being hosed from the pulpit or enforcing gender roles, particularly among the male ones. Like you see this broad-shouldered pastor, and then his, much smaller, skinnier first gentleman, you know what I mean, type of thing. and they will enforce these type of roles, or this is how you're supposed to be and do this. So it's just like, again, it's like typical church stuff in gay face. Clearly, oh, this is one other part too, Sodom and Gomorrah. Everyone likes to bring this up. If you actually read the text, this is where also knowing history matters. So you know the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? And if I'll just briefly go through it in case somebody watching it doesn't know what it is. So basically, Abraham had a nephew named Lot, and so Lot lived in Sodom and Gomorrah. And so God is like, I don't like that place. I heard lots of complaints from that place, and I'm going to burn it up. So before I do that, though, I'm going to talk to Abraham to see what he thinks. So God goes to Abraham and is like, okay, I'm about to fuck Sodom and Gomorrah up. What you think? Abraham was like, well, no. What if there's someone good there? He's like, ain't nobody good there. Of course, I'm paraphrasing. Ain't nobody good over there. He said, well, if there are 1,000 good people there, would you spare the city? He was like, you know what? I would. There ain't, but I would if there were. What if there were 100? He said, I would. There ain't, but I would. So what if you could find one person? He's like, all right, damn it, fine. If there is one person, we'll see what we can do. And so being that the case, then God sends two messengers, what we would call an angel, down there. And they go to Lot's house, which is, again, Abraham's uncle. And Lot lets them in. He, takes care of them. And what people don't realize is that in the ancient Near East, and still to this day, hospitality is considered a virtue. And so you're supposed to help people and strangers that are walking through your land. You're supposed to, which is why when you see Christians being anti-immigration now, it literally makes no sense because they were commanded to not be. So this is when the townspeople come and start banging on the door saying, give us these men, give us these men. Here's the first thing. Given the way it's written, from my understanding, it's people. It's not just men banging at that door. The implication is that it's just people in general being a mess. That's the first thing. So that's on them. The second thing is that Lot says, well, no, take my daughters instead. He was willing to give his daughters. Now, in the ancient world, that's like, him going above and beyond for his guest. Of course, we know that's awful, right? No one should be given to the mob, but to surrender your daughter to people who you don't know, that's really bad. The people all around them, the two angels are like, okay, we've seen enough. Lot, get your kids and your wife, get out of here. God's going to fuck this place up. And so they leave. God blows everything up. Lot's wife looks back, turns to a pillar of salt, and then we continue with the story. So again, like I said, one, the language there, when you read the language in Hebrew, it doesn't necessarily indicate that we're talking about just men who were being the mob, probably men and women, right? Also, it says elsewhere in Ezekiel later on that the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah was that they were greedy. They did not help people. They did not care about people.
I always thought it was because they were rude. Yeah, like they were rude and inhospitable.
They're rude, inhospitable. We're putting, and so the point was, and when you understand storytelling from ancient storytelling, they created that situation to highlight that the people there, because generosity was held at such a high value, this place was deplorable because they were not hospitable. And Lot was the only righteous one there because he was the only one that was hospitable, even to the point of offering up his own children, instead of the guest, right? So that hyperbole is how they made points. And so it wasn't that they were gay, because again, we know that there are men and women at the door banging at it. So it can't just simply be a gay thing. Two, how do we know that they want to necessarily have sex with them? They could just want to kill them. They could just want to pull them apart, give them to us so that way we may know them or whatever. And, but it's not necessarily clear that, we want to have sex with these people per se. And even if they did, again, it's men and women. So even if that's especially the topic, if they're men and women at this door, it can't simply be a gay thing. let's assume that there's like you have any more than 20 people, somebody gay, right? So if God blew them up, it wasn't because they were gay, it's because they were rude, inhospitable, and violent. That is why. And so that's what that, when people bring up that story, that's really what it's talking about. But yeah, like I said, let me just proves more to the point. We are asking, we are asking for an answer from a book that is never trying to even ask the question. It just was not asking that question. So we're asking it to answer something that it was not trying to talk about. So what you do with that information, I think that frees the person up to make different decisions. The things that are blatantly mentioned, that one of the few things that is across the board in the scripture is that it is a sin to be greedy, to mistreat the poor, to hoard wealth, and to treat strangers poorly. So basically, the United States is Sodom and Gomorrah, basically. The Western world is Sodom and Gomorrah. You have to add faith, belief stuff to those stories to get to a different idea. Like some things are open up to interpretation, but there are other things where it's like, we know what they were talking about. We get what these things are. Now, that's not what they're talking about in churches. They have their own colloquial interpretation of that, but that's not what they were saying here.